All right, so this is a video I said I was going to make like 8 months ago, and I'm just now getting around to it. That's right, this is how to identify mushrooms. It's going to be a long one, so I have a lot to go over. But if you are interested in learning how to identify, forage for, or just appreciate mushrooms, then I think you'll get something out of it. So stick around. Alright, here's my first specimen. This is a mushroom in the genus Chlorophyllum, for anyone curious. But this is what I'm going to use to demonstrate, well, before we get into keys or online resources or anything of that nature. I just want to go over a list of, it's going to be kind of a long list, so maybe take notes, of features that you need to take note of when you're trying to identify a mushroom. So, first off, some basic anatomy. This is called the stipe. This is the cap. The upper layer of the cap is the pileus. These are called gills. Some mushrooms at the base have what's called a vulva, which is sort of a egg-like protrusion that they grow out of. And this is what's called an annulus. Alright. Are all those? So vulva, not present. Stipe, annulus, gills, pileus. Alright, so still on basic anatomy, let's take a look at our second specimen, or set of specimens. So these are mushrooms in the genus Gymnopolis. And if you remember our basic anatomy, this is the cap. The top layer is the pellicle, or pileus. These are the gills, which are attached to the underside of the cap. And this is the stipe. There is no vulva. The vulva is absent, as is the annulus. Alright, so wrapping up basic anatomy, let's take a look at our third specimen. This is a mushroom in the genus Agaricus. And it has what is called a partial veil, which is intact. The partial veil is a membrane that connects the cap margin to the stipe. Now, when the cap unfurls, the partial veil will break and may or may not leave an annulus on the stipe. So, when we talk about an annulus, we're really talking about partial veil remnants. And an annulus is not the only kind of evidence you can find of a partial veil being present or having been present. You can also find little pieces of the veil around the cap margin. And you can find a sort of a ring zone or an area where an annulus would be, where there's a sort of a change in the contour of the surface of the stipe. Okay. So that about does it for external anatomy. Let's pop this guy open. So this is called a cross section. This is going to give us a better view of the inside of this mushroom. So again, see we have a cap, gills, stipe, partial veil remnants, and no vulva. So we've talked about partial veils. There's also what's called universal veils, which the vulva is a vestige of. You also see mushrooms with a universal veil. You'll see a patch or warts on the cap. Those features are particularly common among mushrooms in the genus Amanita. Alright, so now that we've defined our first 11 identification features, I'm going to go over some examples. First one here is a mushroom in the genus Hygrocybe or Hygrocybe. This mushroom lacks any evidence of either a universal or partial veil. There's no vulva, there's no annulus, there's no patch or warts. So that's two out of the way. The upper layer of the cap is very slimy, fragile, and it's this very vibrant orange color. And somewhat translucent as well. See, the upper layer of the cap is, at least the pellicle is somewhat translucent. Gelatinous also. Is it separable? Yes, it does appear to be separable. That means you can peel it off. By contrast, the gills are opaque. The stipe is similar in texture to the upper layer of the cap, albeit more fibrous, but also translucent. But the color is different depending on whether we're looking at the outside or the inside of the stipe. And the inside is this sort of gray tinged clear white color, and the outside it is yellow. It doesn't taste like anything. Alright, there's our first example. Alright, second one. This is a mushroom in the genus Gomphidius. Alright. It's very eaten up, so there's no, as far as I can see, no universal or partial veil remnants. Although that may have more to do with the condition that this mushroom is in. The cap is also slimy. The upper layer of the cap is, very separable. That's a great example of separable pellicle. Peels right off. Underneath the flesh is white, and it's a sponge-like, although this is kind of waterlogged. What's interesting here is that the stipe is, where it was below the ground, it is bright yellow, and where it is above the ground, it is white. And let's see, the yellow, yes, does seem to run into the inside of the stipe as well. Alright, our gills are white. Alright, and on to our third and final example before we add some more identification features. So this is a mushroom in the genus Lepiota, I think. Alright, and I'm going to add 3 identification features with this. So, the first one has to do with the cap. This has a sort of nipple-like protrusion in the center of the cap, which is called an umbo. We say a mushroom with a umbo on the cap is umbonate. And the gills, let's try to take a close look at where the gills actually meet the stipe. You can see that they're, ooh, you got a good view of it, not connected to the stipe whatsoever. So these gills are what are called free. There's 4 categories that describe how the gills can connect to the stipe. They're free, adnexed, adnate, and decurrent. So that's an example of free gills. Alright, here's another specimen of that Gumphidius. And before there was no evidence of a partial veil, but we can see with this specimen there is veil remnants connecting this ring zone to the cap margin. Same thing there. So it's just a clarifying point. And while we're on the topic of gills, these are decurrent gills. Alright, here's our next set of specimens. These are mushrooms in the genus Armillaria. So first, let's go over the features we've already talked about. You can see nice prominent annulus, which is evidence that there was once a partial veil. We've got gills that are, not free, not quite decurrent. These are either adnate or adnexed, you know? I'll have to clip something in going over the difference between those two, but I'm a little rusty on it. Alright, gills are same color as the stipe, at least the exterior of it. The inside of the stipe, however, is the same color as the inner layer of the cap. The top layer of the cap does not appear to be separable. Does not peel off. I'm going to cut it short, I think, on the features we've already gone over because I want to add a few more. So this white patch here is actually a spore deposit from this mushroom here. So, feature number 14, spore color. In this case, white. This can usually be determined by examining the top of the annulus, spore deposits on the stipe, spore deposits on surrounding material, spore deposits on the cap of neighboring mushrooms. But in cases where it cannot be, it is best practice to do a spore print. which just involves cutting the cap off of the mushroom, putting it under a cup on a piece of aluminum foil, and leaving it for 2 to 12 hours. So spore color, that's 14. Feature number 15 is growth patterns. So you can see these are all growing out of a cluster in the same way that our Gymnobolus specimens were. They're exhibiting what's called clustered growth. Now there's a number of growth patterns. There's clustered that we see here. There's gregarious, where they grow in sort of patches. We can see some gregarious growth with these mushrooms here. There's a number of them in one area, but they're not all growing out of one spot. And then solitary, such as the Lepiota. All right, so like I said, we do still have 2 more identification features to go over, but I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit and talk about photographing mushrooms. So, this right here, this shot that I've lined up, is called an in situ shot. What that means is that the mushroom, I haven't pulled it out of the ground. It's still growing from its natural habitat. Habitat being our 15th identification feature. In this case, this Stropharia is growing out of coniferous debris, a mix of needles, chips, mulch essentially. An in situ shot is a good start. We also, of course, have the cross section, which shows some more of the features, the interior anatomy, color of the flesh, etc. It's also one of the better ways to show the color of the gills and whether the gills are attached, free, adnate, unmixed, etc., etc. The typical way that I photograph a mushroom for identification is to take one that's growing out of the ground and another one, if I can find another one, and I put them next to each other. And I line up a shot like this. So that gets the gills, the cap, the stipe, where it's growing, has the benefits of an in situ shot, etc. But you can do one better, and you can line up one in situ, a cross section, and the gills. If you do that, you only need to take one photograph per mushroom that you're trying to identify. Just in time, I found the perfect specimen for our 16th identification feature, which are striations along the cap or cap margin. These are lines that run radially, you say radially, along the cap and sort of mirror the pattern of the gills underneath. They tend to be more pronounced along the margin of the cap. So, striations. So those are our 16 features. It's taste, color, and texture of the cap, stipe, and did we say gills? Taste of the gills. Yeah, that's a weird one. The presence or lack of universal and partial veil remnants. Presence or lack of an umbo. Striations. On both on the cap Then we have whether the upper layer of the cap is separable, can be peeled off. I don't think I included that before, so let's say that goes in the slot where taste of the gills is, because you don't need to go tasting every mushroom gill that you see. We have, well, I just lost count with my hands, but yeah, you get the idea.